Today I'll be showing you how to set up a lightweight web server on your Raspberry Pi. We will be using Raspbian Jessie Lite as our operating system. Since the Raspberry Pi doesn't offer as much computing power as conventional web servers do, we'll need to ensure that we make our Raspberry Pi web server as light as possible. Basically meaning that we don't want to install anything on it that doesn't need to be there, or anything that's going to max out the RAM or CPU. So let's title this our minimalistic, bite-sized, handy-dandy home web server. So I'm going to assume that you already have your Raspberry Pi and your SD card ready to go. And if that's the case, you can go ahead and download SD card formatter. You're going to need to format your SD card before we begin. And then after you download SD card formatter, you can download Win32 Disk Imager. We will be using this to install our disk image onto our SD card. And after you have that downloaded, you can head on over to raspberrypi.org and go to their downloads section. Click on Raspbian, and then we will be choosing Raspbian Jessie Lite as our operating system, so you can go ahead and download that zip file. Keep in mind that you will need a data compression tool to be able to extract the contents from the zip file. And while that's downloading, we can continue and format our SD card. So here, just select the drive that your SD card is in, and then click the Format button. And our size is 14.8 gigabytes. This is actually a 16 gigabyte SD card. Normally I do recommend 16 gigabytes. You could probably get away with doing 8 though. And after you have it formatted, we can open up Win32 Disk Imager. And up here at the top, we need to select our image file. So you will need to locate the disk image file that you extracted from your zip folder. In that case, it's the Raspbian Jessie Lite. We'll click Open. So we now have our disk image file selected, and our device is selected as well, and we click the Write button. And that will write the disk image to the SD card. Alright, and write is successful. Click OK, and we can exit. And now that the disk image is written to the SD card, you can safely remove that from your computer and put it in your Raspberry Pi and boot it up. Now keep in mind that there is no graphical user interface with this version of Raspbian. So after you log in, you should get a screen similar to this, and then you want to log in as user Pi. Password is Raspberry. Now I'm actually logged in to the Raspberry Pi from my computer using SSH. This way it makes it easier to show you what I'm doing. If you want to enable SSH, you can go ahead and use the command and then you would select Advanced Options, SSH, and then you would click Yes to enable it, and OK, and then Finish. And then all you'd have to do is open up your program that you're using to connect through SSH, which in my case I'm using PuTTY, and then you would put in your host name or IP address, and if you're on a local network you can find that out by using the ISPConfig command. And here we can see that our IP address is 192.168.2.13. We'll put that up at the top. And this is port 22, SSH, click open, and then that would open our session. We're going to close that out because we have one open. Alright, so now we are going to enable root, and then we will set the password for the root user. And now we can actually go to the root user using this command. And now we are logged in as root. Alright, so now we will update everything. And now we will upgrade. Alright, now we can check to see if the firmware needs to be updated. We have to install it first. Now we can run it. Alright, now we can reboot. And that will close our session. We will just need to open up another one. Okay, now we need to set up our web server. We will be using nginx rather than Apache. Log back in as root. Okay, now we can test if the installation was successful by navigating to our Raspberry Pi's IP address. And it looks as though it was successful. Now I won't be showing you how to install PHP or MySQL in this video because it is meant to be a minimalistic web server for basic HTML web pages. I will, however, provide links in the description to other videos for different setups. So now we can create our directory for our first website. Now keep in mind that you will need to replace this URL with the domain name or URL of your website. Okay, so we have our directory created. Now we can provide ownership to the Pi user. Okay. And now we can create our index.html file using nano. And we are just going to make this simple. Alright, so we have our simple HTML page. Now if you already have a website created, you can go ahead and put it in there. Alright, so now that we have our simple web page created, we can save it, Control X, Y, and enter. Now I want to make note that this web server configuration isn't meant for just a single website. This setup is actually configured in a way where it can host multiple websites. Alright, so now we will need to copy a file, a configuration file from nginx to deface.com, our website. So we'll go ahead and copy So we are going to copy the default configuration file to our website. And now we can open up that file. Now remember that you will want this domain name here replaced with the domain name or website that you are using. Alright, so this is our default configuration file. Alright, so the first thing we want to do in this file is remove the default server sections, because this will not be our default. And then we can go down a ways and change our root directory, because this is not correct. This is the default directory. So we actually changed it to that there. Just make sure to input your domain name in there. And we will need to add to the server name as well. So you'll need to put in your domain name for that section. And then we can scroll down a little ways. And we need to uncomment out this section. And then we can save the file, Control X, Y, enter. Now, in order to avoid a possible hash bucket memory problem that can arise from adding additional server names, we can actually adjust a value within our configuration file. So we will open that up as well. And then we can locate hash bucket size. So we can just uncomment this line here and save it, Control X, Y, enter. And now we can test to make sure that there are no syntax errors in any of our nginx files. And it says our syntax is okay and the test is successful, so we are good to go. And then we can go ahead and restart to enable our changes. And now we will need to make a few network related changes to a couple of files. So we can go ahead and open up our hosts file. And here you want to put in the IP address of the Raspberry Pi. And then we can just save this file. Control X, Y, enter. Now, like I said before, if you don't know the IP address, you can use the ISPConfig command, which will show you the IP address. Now we can restart the network. And now we need to edit another file. And we can just scroll down a bit. And we are going to insert a section right here. Alright, so we need to set up a static IP. Now this is the IP address of your Raspberry Pi. Now some of these values might be a little different on your end, so you will have to go into your network settings and find out what these values may be. So as far as these values go, the only ones that will most likely be different on your end would be the IP address of your Raspberry Pi. The broadcast will most likely, that number there will be affiliated with the number here. So if that number is a 1 on your end, then you will want to change that number to a 1 as well. And then the gateway, this is basically the IP address of the router. So if the IP address of your home router is different, then you want to put that in there. But aside from that, we can go ahead and comment out everything else in this file. Now keep in mind that as soon as we save this file, the Wi-Fi will become disabled on the Raspberry Pi. So you will want to make sure that you have an Ethernet cable plugged in. I mean, if you plan on using this as a web server, it's best to use an Ethernet cable anyway, because you get better speeds than what you would with Wi-Fi. So we'll go ahead and save this file. Control X, Y, enter, and we can go ahead and restart the network again. And I put a / in there when I was not supposed to. There we go. Now the next step is to access your router. Now I'm currently using a Belkin AC1200, so if you are using a different router, your interface here will be much different than mine, as well as the settings. So you will need to find a section to make changes to the DMZ. And as we can see here, this is my public static IP address that my internet service provider has given me. And here we can actually change our private IP address. So if we put in the IP address of the Raspberry Pi, our public IP is going to point to the Raspberry Pi because it's going to be placed outside of the router's firewall. Alright, so now I will go ahead and apply the changes. Alright, so now we have our changes applied to the router. Now after we have these changes completed, we can actually head on over to the website where you have domain names purchased. You will obviously need a domain name to have your website online. So I will head on over to GoDaddy, that's where I have a domain name purchased. And I will log in. And then we can choose our domain name. And we want to go into the DNS zone file. And we want to adjust our A record, and we want it to point to our public IP address. So when you put in your public IP address, it will take the domain name and it will point it to your home web server. So if you want to find out your public IP address, you can just what's my IP, and then it will show your IP address up at the top, and then you can put that into your A record. So you can go ahead and edit it. Put in your new IP address, click Finish, and then save the changes. So now we have our domain name pointing to our home web server. And now we need to enable our server block by creating a symbolic link. Just make sure that you replace this domain name with yours. And then we can restart nginx. And now we can test and see if it works. So we will put in our domain name up at the top. And there we go. Now if you wanted to host another website, you would just create the directory for it. And then change permissions. And then create our website. Then copy over the nginx configuration file. Now we will need to edit that file. And then we can scroll down, remove default server, remove default server, scroll down, include our root directory for the website itself. And we can go down and add the server name. And then remove this. Save the file. And then we create our symbolic link. And we can check to make sure there are no errors. And then we will restart. Now we have two websites hosted on our home web server. After all that is done, you would have to go back to the website where you purchased the domain name, and then you just have to go into the DNS settings and change the A record to point to your public IP address. And then you shouldn't have any problem accessing both websites from your Raspberry Pi web server. Alright, well, I hope you enjoyed the video. If you have any issues, feel free to use the comment section below. Be sure to check the description as well for other useful videos pertaining to the use of the Raspberry Pi as a web server. And subscribe to keep updated on new videos.